Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan and I'm finally on the Expanse bandwagon. I'm sorry it took so long, I don't have Amazon Prime and the first few episodes were so slow. Also, a lot of characters seem like your typical cliche sci-fi characters. You have the born leader, the square-jawed muscle, the hotshot pilot, and of course the run-down detective. But as the show went on, not only did these individuals completely defy their stereotypes, they also developed into real, living people. I hope one day I too will be a real boy. But the one thing that Expanse gets right from the very beginning was space combat. As an individual who spends most of his days poring through mistakes made in science fiction, I was seriously impressed by the amount of research and creativity that went into solving all of the crazy issues one might face while trying to kill people in space while flying around in a metal tin can. When Han Solo jumps the Millennium Falcon past the oscillating planetary shields on Starkiller Base, he deaccelerates from FTL speeds to a couple hundred miles per hour. In Star Wars, there's actually a device called the inertial dampener that actually creates an artificial gravity bubble around the ship, protecting individuals from what should have been a terrible, terrible death. Gravity kills, and massive acceleration and deacceleration that we see in space combat all the time kills as well. In the Expanse universe, most ships are not limited by the power of their thrusters, but by how much acceleration the crew inside can tolerate. This is a real-life limitation that we are facing today, and we don't really have many answers to it. There are specific suits that can be worn that help keep your blood from pooling in your lower extremities. One of the dangerous side effects of high G-force maneuvers is that the blood in your veins literally won't be able to pump normally, creating all sorts of issues like hypoxia or even stroke. Of course, an individual's natural tolerance to these kind of shenanigans will vary. A young Martian Marine who trains their body constantly for warfare will be able to tolerate a lot more G's than an older UN ambassador without much physical training. The inclusion of G-force adds a completely new element to space battles in the Expanse, another factor that the pilot has to take into account. Do you push the ship to its limit to avoid enemy fire but potentially kill your passengers or at least knock them out in the process? At the same time, it also makes me wonder, wouldn't it have been better if these ships were just remotely piloted or piloted by AI? It should be noted that in the Expanse, one way that pilots can withstand more G's is by injecting some type of juice into their veins. I imagine whatever it is, it's probably some kind of amphetamine that increases blood flow. It's actually supposed to be a pretty intense cocktail, and after a user gets off the juice, they feel fatigued, have nausea, and the shakes. I wonder if there's a dependency issue to the juice. It's definitely dangerous enough that passengers who aren't flying the ship get a different type of cocktail, which usually sedates them instead. Oh, and the Expanse also does a really good job at depicting deacceleration as well. The weapons in the Expanse are not only powerful, functional, but also completely within the realm of believability. This means mostly a variety of kinetic weapons, many of which we already have the technology to develop. Combat in the Expanse is separated into three distinct stages. Long-range combat starts with missiles and torpedoes at ranges of tens of thousands of miles. There are also a variety of different types of missiles, but most are fitted with warheads and some with nukes. Traveling at incredible speeds, combat in the Expanse starts immediately after one ship enters missile range. Then, at the medium stage of combat of around 1,000 kilometers, we have railguns that fire kinetic projectiles with stupid amounts of power. Unlike torpedoes, which can be fitted even on the smallest of ships, railguns require a large energy source, usually from a fusion reactor, which is why only larger class ships will have these weapons. Railguns can easily penetrate an entire ship and even hit multiple ships in one shot. While their rounds lack the explosiveness of a warhead, they have that penetration and surgical strike capability that can target very important parts of the enemy ship, like their fusion reactor or CIC. At close ranges of around 1 to 5 kilometers, we have the PDCs, or Point Defense Cannons. These are basically the space version of the CIWS point defense cannons we have on Earth ships right now. Of course, these PDCs usually use 40mm cannon rounds and fire at an incredibly high rate. Just like here on Earth, these PDCs use algorithms and sensors to detect incoming missiles instead of using human operators. And yes, like everything else on their ship, ammunition for the PDCs do run out. We recently almost spent an entire video about how most sci-fi movies get orbital mechanics and space movement wrong when it comes to dogfights. When we watch Star Wars, what we are seeing is starships mimicking the motions of airplanes flying in atmosphere with air resistance. In the Expanse, all of these ships fly with very realistic physics that we might see in deep space. This means no control surfaces or aerodynamics. Instead, we see the conservation of momentum and angular momentum, all of which is controlled by the thrusters. You basically are stuck on that trajectory until you flip and burn to deaccelerate to a speed where you can actually change course. The reality is maneuverability when your ship is traveling at a full burn will be limited, and any extreme shifts in direction will probably kill your crew or make your ship disintegrate. Also, in space, the trajectories and speed of a ship are also highly reliant on the gravitational pull of nearby celestial bodies. A crafty pilot will utilize the gravity in the theater of battle to their advantage to give them more speed and energy. And so when I talked about the 3 stages of combat in the Expanse universe, that is literally how things will always play out every time. 2 sides overlap their current orbit or trajectories over one another, and then fly at each other at top speeds, hoping that their ship's PDCs can protect them long enough so that they can destroy the enemy. So what we're going to see is not a dogfight in space where one individual is following the other. Instead, it's going to be more like a high-speed joust. When smaller ships in the Expanse go into combat, the crew generally dons vac suits, sometimes covered in armored paneling. This is because in the Expanse, ships only have armor and active defenses. There is no shielding, which means every stray railgun round can penetrate the deck and expose everyone in a vacuum. The Rocinante, which is a small Corvette-class frigate, only has a few inches of armor surrounding its combat information center, and whenever the crew enters CQB, holes are generally shot through the hull. On a larger ship like the Agatha King, a Truman-class dreadnought, the CIC is surrounded by multiple decks and compartments. There still are vac suits within the reach of the crew, but generally the officers on the deck are in their working uniforms. But then again, even if you are in the middle of a ship surrounded by multiple compartments and multiple layers, the chances of a railgun round going right through multiple layers is still very high, which is why no matter what ship I'm on, I always go AT-GAT. While being held captive on the Martian battleship the Donnager, a group of spacers found themselves trapped in an interior compartment during a CQB battle. The enemies of the Donnager managed to land several railgun shots right through the hull of the ship. One of those rounds happened to go right through the prisoner holding bay, taking out a medic. Instead of panicking, the spacers quickly get to work and access some emergency panels with metal plates that can be used to patch up any holes. Then they use a type of liquefied sealing material to make sure that they stay in place. It makes sense that a ship like this would have emergency panels all over the ship, because in any close range battle when you're using railguns, again, there are going to be holes. Even though the spacers in the Expanse come from a very diverse and varied background, they all share some very similar qualities to our modern day astronauts, including being pretty well versed in basic orbital mechanics and the mathematical equations you would use for spaceflight. Like any astronaut today, making the correct course calculations is an integral part of staying alive for extended periods of time in space. And so whether you're a pilot or a mechanic or a medic, everyone has some basic understanding of space travel mechanics. Which makes a lot of sense. The average American today probably has a lot more information inside of their head than an American 50 years ago. Not all of it useful, of course. But then again, we also have knowledge today about entirely new systems that didn't even exist back then, like how to operate a computer or the internet. If humanity were able to finally colonize the rest of the system and occupy multiple planets, it only makes sense that STEM would become a more important part of the learning curriculum, as well as critical problem-solving skills. The Expanse also treats simulated gravity very realistically. Instead of just having magical devices on board that can simulate Earth's gravity, ships in the Expanse use centrifugal force to generate gravity. Unfortunately, most ships are far too small to create this effect, so most of the time spacers will wear magnetic boots while walking around their ships. It should be noted that most likely in a smaller ship like the Rocinante, we should see controls oriented for zero-G like what we have on the ISS. But instead, the interior of the Rocinante and other small vessels are built for gravity, which means all the seats and consoles are all oriented in one direction. This is most likely due to the budgetary constraints of this TV show. It just doesn't make sense to film all of these scenes in zero gravity or microgravity. As good as magnetic boots are, it's actually a lot less convenient than just floating around in space. Of course, not everyone is Tom Cruise and has Elon Musk as a friend so that he can, film movies in space. Now, I hope you enjoyed today's video, guys, about the Expanse. As you can tell, I really like this show. I highly recommend it. If you guys are into realistic portrayals of space combat, this is the best show that does it right now. Well, guys, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.